Congratulations to Kieran, I said, the words scraping against my throat like sandpaper. My name is Dimitri Volkov. I'm 39 years old, and I just watched 7 years of flawless dedication get handed to a 25-year-old who'd been at Meridian Tech Solutions for exactly 4 months. The boardroom fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my career dying. The marble conference table reflected the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows of our downtown Seattle office. 30 floors below, the city buzzed with life while mine came to a grinding halt. CEO Harrison Blackwell stood at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing that practice smile he reserved for board meetings and company announcements. Kieran will be taking over as Director of Digital Innovation, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never questioned whether he deserved his position. Effective immediately. I kept my hands folded on the polished table, my face a mask of professional composure. But inside, something cold and sharp was crystallizing where hope used to live. Kieran Blackwell, fresh out of Stanford with his MBA still warm from the printer, grinned like he'd just won the lottery, which, in a way, he had. The other department heads offered their congratulations, their voices a distant murmur as I processed what had just happened. 7 years. 7 years of arriving first and leaving last. 7 years of turning Meridian's struggling digital division into a profit powerhouse. 7 years of 14-hour days, weekend emergencies, and missed family dinners. Also, I could sit here and watch nepotism triumph over merit. Kieran's last name wasn't a coincidence. Harrison's nephew had spent 4 months observing operations, which meant sitting in on my client calls, taking notes while I explained complex digital transformation strategies, and asking questions that revealed he couldn't distinguish between cloud computing and weather forecasting. Dimitri has been instrumental in bringing Kieran up to speed, Harrison added, as if that somehow made the betrayal sting less. As if 7 years of building this division from nothing was just elaborate job training for someone else's golden boy. I nodded and smiled. Happy to help, I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. The meeting ended. People filed out, patting Kieran on the back. I gathered my leather portfolio slowly, my mind suddenly crystal clear for the first time in months. Harrison caught my arm as I reached the mahogany doors. Dimitri, stay back a moment. We stood alone in the boardroom, the afternoon shadows growing longer across the polished floor. He loosened his Hermes tie and attempted what I assumed was meant to be a sympathetic expression. I know this might come as a surprise, he began, straightening his platinum cufflinks. But Kieran brings fresh perspectives, new energy from the younger generation. Fresh perspectives? The kid who'd asked me last week if our cloud servers were actual clouds in the sky. The same nephew who'd suggested we pivot our entire AI division to focus on making apps more fun during a client presentation that nearly cost us a $3 million contract. I understand, I said, keeping my voice level. Good. I knew you'd be professional about this. Harrison's relief was palpable. That's why you're such a valuable asset to this company. Valuable. Just not valuable enough for the promotion I'd earned through 7 years of transforming Meridian's digital presence from embarrassingly outdated to industry-leading. Not valuable enough to be chosen over a 25-year-old whose biggest achievement was graduating with daddy's connections. I'd built our AI consulting division from scratch, bringing in $12 million in annual revenue. I'd personally managed the digital transformation for Fortune 500 companies, earning Meridian recognition as one of the Pacific Northwest's top tech innovators. My teams had won 3 industry awards under my leadership. But Kieran had the Blackwell name and a Stanford MBA that cost more than most people's houses. Kieran will need your support during this transition, Harrison continued. Your expertise will be invaluable in helping him settle into the role. There it was, the final insult wrapped in corporate speak. I wasn't just being passed over. I was being asked to mentor my replacement, to train the person who'd stolen my future and pretend to be grateful for the opportunity. Of course, I replied. I'll make sure he has everything he needs. Harrison smiled that practiced politicians smile. I knew I could count on you, Dimitri. You understand how these things work. I understood perfectly. Nepotism trumped merit. Family connections mattered more than performance, and employees like me were expected to smile and accept whatever scraps fell from the executive table. I walked back to my corner office, the one with the view of Elliott Bay that I'd earned after my third year of exceeding every performance metric. The walls displayed my achievements, framed certifications, photos from industry conferences where I'd been keynote speaker, thank you letters from clients whose businesses I'd revolutionized. I'd started at Meridian Tech Solutions in 2018, right after my wife Elena left me for her yoga instructor. Needed a fresh start, and digital transformation consulting seemed like solid ground to rebuild on. The company was struggling then. Their digital solutions consisted of basic website design and email marketing campaigns that looked like they'd been created in 2005. Harrison hired me himself during a desperate restructuring phase. The board was threatening to shut down the digital division entirely after 3 consecutive years of losses. We need someone with vision, he'd told me during my interview. Someone who can drag us into the modern age. I became that someone. Worked 80-hour weeks learning every client's business inside and out. Stayed until midnight developing AI-powered solutions that transformed their operations. Built a team of brilliant developers and analysts who respected my leadership because I'd earned it in the trenches with them. My daughter Anya visited every other weekend, flying in from Portland where she lived with her mother. She was 19 now, studying computer science at Portland State, inspired by watching her father build something meaningful. She'd grown up seeing me at the kitchen table on Sundays, laptop open, fine-tuning algorithms and client presentations. "Dad, you're always working," she'd tease, but she understood. She knew I was building something bigger than just a job. I was creating a legacy. When she decided on her major, she'd said, "I want to do what you do. Make technology help people." Elena had remarried a cardiologist who worked predictable hours and took family vacations to Europe. I was the dad who missed some dinners but never missed sending tuition payments, who couldn't always attend her school events but could explain why machine learning would shape her generation's future. The first warning sign came 8 months ago when Harrison mentioned his nephew might join the company. "Brilliant kid," he'd said. "Top of his class at Stanford Business School." I'd assumed entry-level position, maybe junior analyst. Let him learn the industry from experienced professionals. But Kieran started as strategic advisor with an office 2 doors down from Harrison's, earning what I suspected was close to my own salary for bringing innovative thinking to traditional processes. The humiliation began immediately. Harrison assigned me to onboard Kieran, which meant sitting through painful meetings where I explained basic concepts while he nodded sagely and took notes on his gold-plated MacBook. "So when you say machine learning," Kieran would interrupt during client calls, "you mean the computers are literally learning? Like studying books?" I'd watch our clients' faces on video conferences, seeing their confidence in Meridian's expertise evaporate in real time. Then I'd spend hours after each meeting doing damage control, reassuring them that our technical capabilities remained unchanged. Kieran shadowed me everywhere. Executive meetings where I presented quarterly results. Kieran sat beside Harrison, occasionally nodding as if he understood the complex analytics I'd spent weeks preparing. Client site visits where I diagnosed system inefficiencies. Kieran tagged along with his notebook, asking vendors if they'd considered making things more user-friendly. The worst part was watching Harrison's face during these interactions. Pride. Genuine paternal pride in his nephew's engagement and fresh questions. What I saw as dangerous incompetence, Harrison interpreted as innovative thinking unconstrained by conventional limitations. Kieran brings an outsider's perspective, Harrison told the board during our monthly review. Sometimes we get too caught up in technical complexities and lose sight of simple solutions. Simple solutions. Like the time Kieran suggested we could reduce our cloud computing costs by just using fewer servers, or when he proposed replacing our custom AI algorithms with one of those ChatGPT things to handle client data analysis. My team started looking to me with barely concealed frustration. These were brilliant professionals, data scientists with PhDs, software architects with decades of experience, being forced to smile politely while a business school graduate explained technology to them. "Is he serious?" My lead developer, Priya, whispered after Kiran suggested we could improve our quantum computing research by making it more like regular computing but faster. But the breaking point came during our presentation to Cascade Industries, our biggest potential client. I'd spent 3 months developing a comprehensive digital transformation strategy worth $8 million. The presentation was flawless. Detailed analysis, projected ROI, implementation timeline. Then Kiran stood up. "What my uncle's team has shown you is impressive," he began, and my blood ran cold. Uncle's team. But I think we're overcomplicating things. What if we just streamlined everything into a single app? The Cascade executives exchanged glances. Their CTO looked confused. "An app for what exactly?" "For everything," Kiran replied confidently. "Business stuff. Making it simpler." I watched 8 million walk out the door 20 minutes later. The moment that shattered my remaining illusions came 3 weeks ago. I'd stayed late to prepare for our quarterly board presentation, fine-tuning revenue projections and client satisfaction metrics. The 30th floor was empty except for security and the cleaning crew. I was heading to the break room for my 4th coffee when I heard voices from Harrison's corner office. His door was slightly ajar, and sound carried better in the empty building than people realized. The board's asking questions about Kiran's qualifications. Harrison's voice was strained. "He's only been here 4 months, and some members are questioning the promotion timeline." Another voice, deeper and older. "Probably Richard Sterling from the executive committee. You promised them Dimitri was being groomed for director level. He's got the track record, the client relationships, the team respect." "Dimitri's solid," Harrison replied, "but Kiran's family. He's got fresh ideas, and frankly, the optics are better. Young leadership, new generation thinking. The board likes that narrative." "What about Dimitri's performance metrics? His division generated 60% of our digital revenue last year." Harrison's laugh was cold, calculated. "Dimitri's a good soldier, reliable, hardworking, but he's not executive material. He'll keep doing what he's doing, collect his paycheck, and everything works out. He's got a daughter in college, divorce payments. He needs this job more than it needs him." I stood frozen in that hallway, listening to them dissect my future like a quarterly budget review. "Dimitri won't cause problems," Harrison continued with casual certainty. "He's too invested in his current lifestyle to rock the boat. 7 years here, comfortable salary, good benefits. He'll train Kiran, support the transition, and be grateful we're keeping him around. And if he objects, he won't. Guys like Dimitri don't take risks. They fall in line because they have too much to lose." That phrase hit me like physical violence. Fall in line. Like I was livestock being managed, not a professional who'd built their digital division from nothing. Like 7 years of excellence had earned me the privilege of accepting whatever scraps they chose to throw. I walked back to my office in complete silence, gathered my things, and drove home through the empty Seattle streets. That night, I sat in my apartment overlooking Puget Sound, unable to sleep, replaying Harrison's words. He'll fall in line because he has too much to lose. I thought about my daughter Anya, how proud she'd been when I'd mentioned the possible promotion. "Director Volkov," she joked. "That has a nice ring to it." I thought about my ex-wife Elena, who'd always criticized my lack of backbone during our marriage. "You let people walk all over you, Dimitri," she'd said during one of our final arguments. "Stand up for yourself for once." Maybe she'd been right. Maybe I had spent too many years being the reliable soldier, the team player, the one who never complained and always delivered. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was like waking up from a fog that had been clouding my judgment for months. I watched the office dynamics with new eyes, seeing patterns I'd been too loyal to acknowledge. I observed how Harrison included Kiran in executive strategy meetings while keeping me focused on operational details. Noticed how other department heads had begun deferring to Kiran on decisions that should have been mine, reading the political winds and positioning themselves accordingly. During our daily team stand-up, I watched Kieran attempt to contribute to technical discussions he fundamentally didn't understand. My developers exchanged subtle glances, professionally concealing their frustration while their expertise was second-guessed by someone who couldn't distinguish between front-end and back-end development. What if we made our API more intuitive? Kieran suggested during our morning planning session. Like, more user-friendly for the computers using it? Priya, my lead developer, looked at me with barely concealed desperation. APIs weren't designed for user-friendliness. They were technical interfaces for system communication. But I found myself nodding diplomatically, just as I had for months. That's an interesting perspective, Kieran, I said, hating myself for the automatic diplomacy. We'll explore that. After the meeting, I sat alone in my office, staring at the awards on my wall. Industry recognition for innovation. Client testimonials praising my leadership. Photos from conferences where I'd been invited to speak about digital transformation best practices. None of it mattered. Not to Harrison. Not to the board members who'd rather promote family than reward performance. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not another client proposal or performance analysis, but something I should have written months ago. My resignation letter. My hands were steady as I crafted each sentence. No anger, no emotional outbursts, just professional clarity. I detailed my 7 years of service, my contributions to the company's growth, and my decision to pursue opportunities that better aligned with my professional goals. For the first time in months, I felt in control of my own narrative. I saved the document and leaned back in my chair. Outside my window, Elliott Bay stretched toward the Olympic Mountains, the same view I'd enjoyed for years while building something I'd thought would be my legacy. Harrison thought he knew me, thought I was too comfortable, too invested, too scared to challenge his decisions. He'd calculated my compliance based on my financial obligations and personal circumstances. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I scheduled the resignation letter to send Friday at 5:15 p.m., right after the weekly executive meeting where Harrison would undoubtedly praise Kieran's innovative contributions to the team. For once in my professional life, I would control the timing of my own exit. Friday afternoon arrived like an inevitable storm. I'd spent the week maintaining perfect professionalism while watching Kieran stumble through basic responsibilities that should have been mine. At exactly 5:15 p.m., I walked to Harrison's corner office and knocked on his mahogany door. "Dimitri, come in." Harrison looked up from his computer, probably reviewing stock options or planning his next family vacation. "What can I do for you?" I placed the sealed envelope on his desk. "This is my 2 weeks' notice." Harrison's expressions cycled through confusion, disbelief, then something approaching panic. He tore open the envelope and read quickly, his eyes darting across the page twice before he looked up. "Is this some kind of joke?" His voice carried an edge I'd rarely heard. "No, sir. I'm resigning from my position, effective 2 weeks from today." Harrison stood abruptly, pacing behind his desk like a caged predator. "You can't be serious. You're leaving because Kieran got the promotion? This is incredibly unprofessional." I remained silent, letting him fill the space with his assumptions. "Dimitri, let's be reasonable here." His tone shifted to the practiced persuasion he used with difficult clients. "You're upset, I understand that. But walking away from 7 years of building your career, that's career suicide. I've made my decision. What about your daughter? Your financial obligations?" There it was, the leverage he'd always believed he held over me. "You've got college tuition, your lifestyle to maintain. You really want to throw that away over hurt feelings?" The phrase hurt feelings hung in the air between us like toxic gas. 7 years of excellence reduced to emotional immaturity. "I'll manage my personal finances," I replied calmly. Harrison's facade cracked. "You realize I won't give you a positive reference? Walking out like this, abandoning your team when they need you most? No serious company will touch you. That's your prerogative." "Damn right it is." His face flushed red. "You think you can pressure me into changing my mind? Think you can throw a tantrum and I'll beg you to stay?" I looked at Harrison for a long moment. This man who'd inherited his position through family connections, who'd built his career on relationships rather than competence, genuinely believed I was the unprofessional one. "I appreciate the clarification about the reference," I said. "It helps me understand exactly where I stand." Harrison sat back down, attempting a different approach. "Look, Dimitri, maybe we rushed things with Kieran. Maybe there's room for both of you in leadership. Associate director position, perhaps?" Associate director. A meaningless title that meant doing the same work for the same pay, while pretending his nephew was my superior. "The resignation stands," I said. "You're making the biggest mistake of your career." Harrison's voice turned cold. "Final. Don't come crawling back when reality hits." I spent my final 2 weeks at Meridian documenting everything Kieran would need to know, not because Harrison deserved my help, but because my team didn't deserve to suffer for their leadership's failures. I created comprehensive guides for every major client relationship, detailed our technical processes, and organized 7 years of institutional knowledge into accessible formats. But I also made other preparations. During lunch breaks, I reached out to contacts I'd built throughout the Pacific Northwest tech industry. Word travels fast in our sector, especially when experienced professionals become available. I was careful, professional, but strategic about who I spoke with. My first call was to Dr. Sarah Chen, CTO of Quantum Dynamics in Vancouver. We'd collaborated on several industry panels, and she'd tried to recruit me twice over the past 3 years. "Dimitri," she said when I called, "I heard through the grapevine there might be changes at Meridian. Are you finally ready to have that conversation?" "I might be," I replied carefully. "Hypothetically speaking, what would that conversation look like?" "Chief Technology Officer position, 30% salary increase, full control of our digital transformation division, and we'd love for you to bring your client relationships with you." Client relationships. In the tech consulting world, clients followed expertise, not company logos. The Fortune 500 companies I'd served over 7 years trusted my judgment, not Meridian's brand. It was standard industry practice, completely ethical, and entirely legal since I'd never signed a non-compete agreement. My second call was to Marcus Torres, CEO of Cascade Industries, the 8 million client Kieran had lost with his Everything app suggestion. Marcus had specifically requested to work with me on future projects. "Marcus, this is Dimitri Volkov from Meridian Tech." "Dimitri, perfect timing. We've been reconsidering our digital transformation needs. That last presentation from your team? Well, let's say we're looking for a different approach." "I understand completely. What if I told you there might be an opportunity to work together under different circumstances?" "I'm listening." By Wednesday of my second week, I had 3 job offers and preliminary commitments from 4 major clients who were interested in following my recommendations regardless of which company I joined. Kieran, meanwhile, was drowning. Without my constant guidance, he'd managed to confuse 2 different clients about their project timelines, accidentally delete important files from our shared server, and suggest during a board call that we could increase profits by charging clients more money for the same stuff. I watched Harrison's stress levels rise as reports filtered back about Kieran's struggles. The nephew who was supposed to bring fresh perspectives was instead bringing client complaints and confused team members. On Thursday afternoon, Harrison called me into his office one final time. "Dimitri, I've been thinking about our conversation last week. Maybe I was hasty. Maybe there's a way we can work this out." I waited. "What if we created a new position? Senior Director of Technical Operations. You'd have full autonomy over the technical side while Kieran handles strategic planning." It was exactly what I'd expected. Panic disguised as compromise. "Thank you for the offer," I said, "but I'll be starting with Quantum Dynamics on Monday." Harrison's face went white. "Quantum Dynamics? Sarah Chen's company?" "Dr. Chen offered me the Chief Technology Officer position. I accepted yesterday." "You can't do this." Harrison's voice cracked slightly. "Your client relationships, your knowledge of our systems, that's proprietary information." "My professional relationships are exactly that, professional, and I haven't shared any proprietary information with anyone." The truth was, I didn't need to. My value wasn't in Meridian's internal systems or trade secrets. It was in my expertise, my track record, and the trust I'd built with clients over 7 years of exceptional service. "I'll sue you for corporate espionage," Harrison threatened. "Non-compete violations, theft of intellectual property." "I never signed a non-compete agreement," I reminded him. "And my knowledge and experience aren't Meridian's intellectual property. They're mine." Harrison slumped in his chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. Without me, Kieran would be managing relationships with Fortune 500 companies he didn't understand, using technical knowledge he didn't possess, leading a team that already questioned his competence. "What about loyalty?" Harrison asked desperately. 7 years we've invested in your career. 7 years I've invested in your company." I corrected. 60-hour weeks, missed family events, building your digital division from nothing. That investment earned me the right to choose my own future. I stood to leave, then turned back. "Kieran's a good kid, Harrison, but he's 25 years old with no industry experience. Putting him in charge of technical operations was always going to end badly, for him and for Meridian." My last day at Meridian Tech Solutions was surprisingly emotional. My team gathered in the conference room for an impromptu farewell, and I saw genuine sadness in their faces. These were brilliant professionals who trusted my leadership and delivered exceptional work under my guidance. "Dr. Chen is hiring," I mentioned casually as we said our goodbyes. "Quantum Dynamics is expanding their development team. 3 of my best people would join me at Quantum within the month." I cleaned out my office, packed 7 years of awards and memories into cardboard boxes, and handed my security badge to Harrison personally. "This isn't over," he said one final time. "For me it is," I replied. I walked out of Meridian Tech Solutions feeling lighter than I had in years. In the parking garage, I called my daughter Anya. "Dad, how was your last day?" "Perfect," I said. "Want to celebrate? I'm buying dinner." "Absolutely. I want to hear everything about your new job." For the first time in months, I had genuinely good news to share. 6 weeks into my role as CTO at Quantum Dynamics, the first signs of Meridian's troubles reached me through industry contacts. My former colleague Priya, who'd stayed behind initially, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Dimitri, you need to hear this," she said, her voice mixing frustration with amusement. "Kieran just lost the Henderson Manufacturing account." Henderson Manufacturing, a $4 million annual client I'd personally managed for 3 years. What happened? He told them their legacy systems were too complicated and suggested they switch everything to smartphone apps. When their CTO explained why that wouldn't work for industrial automation, Kieran argued with him. Actually argued. Said the CTO was stuck in old-school thinking. I winced. Henderson's CTO, Dr. Patricia Williams, was a 20-year veteran who'd revolutionized manufacturing automation across 3 different industries. Kieran had essentially told one of the most respected technical leaders in the Pacific Northwest that she didn't understand technology. "It gets worse," Priya continued. "Harrison tried to do damage control, but Dr. Williams said she'd lost confidence in Meridian's technical leadership. She specifically asked if you were still available for consulting work. Within a week, I'd been contracted by Henderson Manufacturing as an independent consultant, helping them transition to a new primary vendor, Quantum Dynamics. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now earning more from Henderson as a part-time consultant than Meridian was losing by having them as a full-time client. The second domino fell 3 weeks later. Cascade Industries, the 8 million client Kieran had already confused during his Everything app presentation, formally terminated their contract with Meridian. Their CEO, Marcus Torres, called me directly. "Dimitri, we tried to work with your replacement, but it's not sustainable. The kid doesn't understand our business needs, and frankly, we're not comfortable entrusting our digital transformation to someone who suggests we run our entire operation through a single mobile application." Cascade became Quantum Dynamics' newest major client that same week. By month 3, I was hearing whispers through the industry network about internal chaos at Meridian. Kieran had accidentally corrupted their main client database during what he called a system optimization, forcing them to restore from backups and lose 2 weeks of work. He'd also proposed eliminating their cybersecurity protocols because they were slowing down innovation. Harrison was reportedly working 12-hour days trying to personally manage technical relationships he didn't understand, while Kieran attended leadership seminars and innovation workshops instead of learning the basics of the job he'd been given. My former team members who'd remained at Meridian began reaching out with increasing frequency, not just for job opportunities at Quantum, but for basic technical advice about systems I'd designed and processes I'd implemented. "Harrison forbid us from contacting you," admitted James, my former database architect. "But we're drowning. Kieran keeps making changes to your systems without understanding how they work." Yesterday, he deleted what he thought was redundant code that turned out to be the backup protocols for our entire cloud infrastructure. The final piece of news came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chen walked into my office one morning with a copy of Tech Northwest magazine. "Dimitri, you need to see this," she said, placing the publication on my desk. The headline read, "Meridian Tech Solutions Under Investigation. Board Questions, Leadership Decisions." The article detailed how Meridian's digital division had lost over $15 million in annual revenue within 4 months, directly attributed to management restructuring and client relationship disruptions. 8 months after I'd walked out of Meridian Tech Solutions, Dr. Sarah Chen called me into her office with barely contained excitement. "Dimitri, you're going to want to sit down for this," she said, sliding a business journal across her desk. The headline made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. "Meridian Tech Solutions CEO removed. Board cites nepotism investigation." The article was devastating. Harrison Blackwell had been terminated following a comprehensive board investigation into his hiring and promotion practices. The probe had been triggered by shareholders questioning why the company's most profitable division had collapsed so completely under new leadership. The investigation revealed a pattern of family favoritism that prioritized personal relationships over business competency. The article quoted board member Richard Sterling. The promotion of Kieran Blackwell to Director of Digital Innovation, despite lacking industry experience or technical qualifications, directly contributed to the loss of multiple major clients and over $20 million in annual revenue. But the story got better. The board had also discovered that Harrison had been systematically underpaying senior employees while inflating his nephew's compensation package. My salary records, subpoenaed during the investigation, revealed I'd been earning 40% less than industry standard for someone with my experience and performance metrics. Kieran had resigned 2 months earlier, according to the article, after what was diplomatically described as multiple technical incidents that compromised client relationships. Priya had told me the real story. He'd accidentally granted external access to confidential client data during a failed attempt to streamline our security protocols. The most satisfying paragraph detailed the financial impact. Meridian's digital division, once responsible for 60% of company revenue under former CTO Dimitri Volkov, now generates less than 20% of annual income. Several former employees have been recruited by competitors, taking their expertise and client relationships with them. Here's the part that'll really interest you, Dr. Chen continued, flipping to page 3. 3 of Meridian's remaining major clients have already reached out to us, specifically requesting to work with you. I read the list. Apex Manufacturing, Northwest Energy Solutions, and Digital Finance Corp. Combined, they represented $12 million in potential annual contracts. "There's more," she said, barely containing her smile. "The Pacific Northwest Tech Association wants you to keynote their annual conference on ethical leadership in technology. Apparently, your story has become something of a legend in local industry circles." The irony was perfect. Harrison had tried to bury my career by refusing references and questioning my professionalism. Instead, his public failure had made me something of a celebrity in Seattle's tech community, the competent professional who'd been pushed out by nepotism and proved his worth by succeeding elsewhere. My phone buzzed with a text from Anya. "Dad, just saw the news article. Mom called and said even she's proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely." I'll pick the place this time. That evening, I sat in my new corner office at Quantum Dynamics, looking out at the same Elliott Bay view I'd enjoyed at Meridian. But this time, the office was mine because I'd earned it through performance, not politics. The salary was 50% higher, the title reflected my actual responsibilities, and most importantly, I worked for leaders who valued competence over connections. Harrison Blackwell, according to industry gossip, was unemployed and facing potential lawsuits from shareholders who'd lost money due to his mismanagement. Kieran had enrolled in a technical certification program, finally learning the skills he should have had before being promoted to director level. 18 months after leaving Meridian, I was reviewing quarterly reports at Quantum Dynamics when my assistant mentioned I had a visitor in the lobby. A young man named Kieran Blackwell. Says it's personal, not business. I found Kieran waiting by the elevator, looking older and more serious than the confident graduate who'd once taken my job. He wore a simple button-down shirt instead of the expensive suits Harrison had bought him, and carried a worn laptop bag that suggested actual work rather than executive posturing. "Dimitri, thank you for seeing me," he said as we shook hands. "I know I'm probably the last person you expected." I led him to a small conference room overlooking the Seattle waterfront. "What brings you here, Kieran?" He set his laptop bag down carefully, choosing his words with obvious thought. "I wanted to apologize for everything that happened at Meridian, for taking a position I wasn't qualified for letting Uncle Harrison put me in that situation." I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse instead of the entitled confidence I remembered. "You were 25 years old, Kieran. Your uncle created that situation, not you. Maybe, but I should have recognized I was in over my head. Should have insisted on proper training instead of pretending I understood things I didn't." He paused, looking out at Elliott Bay. "I cost you a promotion you'd earned. I cost the company millions in revenue. I cost good people their jobs when the division had to be restructured." "What are you doing now?" I asked. "Software Development Certification Program at University of Washington. Started from the ground up. Basic programming, database management, system architecture. Everything I should have learned before anyone gave me responsibility for other people's work." He smiled ruefully. "Turns out business school doesn't actually teach you how technology works." "And your uncle?" Kieran's expression darkened. "We don't speak anymore. He blames you for everything that happened. Says you sabotaged the company out of spite." He met my eyes directly. "I know that's not true. I watched you try to help me succeed even after I'd taken your job. You documented everything I needed to know, answered my questions patiently, tried to prevent the disasters I caused through ignorance." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching ferries cross the Sound. "I heard you're keynoting the Tech Leadership Conference next month," Kieran said. "I'll be attending as a student, looking forward to learning from someone who actually knows what they're talking about." I laughed. "It's called Building Ethical Tech Leadership. Seems appropriate." "Very." Kieran stood to leave, then turned back. "Dimitri, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know what you did. Walking away from a bad situation and building something better somewhere else. That took courage I didn't have. Still don't have, probably. You're here apologizing to someone you had every reason to avoid," I pointed out. "That's its own kind of courage." After Kieran left, I returned to my office and called Anya to tell her about the unexpected visit. "That must have felt good," she said. "Getting an apology from the guy who stole your job." "It did, but not for the reason you'd think. It felt good because he's finally learning what his uncle never understood, that respect has to be earned. And you earned yours the hard way. The only way that matters." That evening, I updated my keynote presentation, adding a new section about the importance of walking away from situations that don't value your contributions. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply building something better and letting your success speak for itself. Harrison had been wrong about so many things, but mostly about his assumption that I needed Meridian more than Meridian needed me. 7 years of perfect performance had been my investment in my own reputation, not just the company's success. The best part? I was finally in a position where my work spoke louder than anyone else's politics.